Good evening and welcome. My name is Mike Wright and I represent Foresight Wealth Advisory. Tonight we're going to discuss Estate Planning 101, Protecting What Matters. I have over 40 years of small business experience, 23 years in financial planning and investment advice. For 10 of those years, I was a certified financial planner. I left the financial planning business 10 years ago, and I'm not currently a CFP. For the last 10 years, I've advised small business owners throughout the country on business financing, how to overcome cash flow issues, how to restructure debt, and how to get the capital they need to grow their most important asset for their financial future. I recently started an independent wealth management firm, Foresight Wealth Advisory, because in the past few years, more and more family and friends have inquired to get second opinions on their financial plans. They all have good financial advisors, accountants, and attorneys. But what we kept finding was, especially in estate plans and financial plans, that they weren't fully implemented. There was a lack of coordination between the other advisors and what was actually being done for the client. So that exposed, hundreds of thousands of dollars that um, of opportunity that were lost, and more importantly, we found that like assets, um, properties, things like that were exposed to liabilities, and they really shouldn't have been because all the work had been done. It just hadn't been put together. So um, I need to say I'm not an attorney. We help people work on their estate plans, map things out, retirement plans. Not an attorney this evening. There's no specific advice. This is for educational purposes only. So, what should you expect? Here are the estate planning topics we're going to cover. What is estate planning? Who should have an estate? What legal documents make up a basic estate plan? What is estate administration and probate? And what types of taxes are involved in estate planning? These are very important questions when it comes to estate plan. Do you have a will? Do you have a trust? Do you have a power of attorney? Do you have a HIPAA waiver? If you answered yes to any of these, think when was the last time the information was reviewed and updated? That's very important because we go in, we get things done, we get busy, and sometimes what we have found is there's a lot of, like I mentioned before, lack of coordination. Things don't get titled right, and so you had the work done, and it may or may not be where you want it to be at this point in time. Also, where do you keep these documents safe? Personal story, we had someone in the family, they had to go to the hospital, got put on a ventilator, and they had all this stuff done, but no one knew how to access it. So it's very important that your loved ones, the people you want to execute things for you, that they know, where to go to get the information and grant your wishes. What is estate planning? It's the process of mapping out how you want your personal and financial affairs to be handled in the case of incapacity or death, and creating the legal documents necessary to do so. The goals of estate planning include ensuring assets are managed properly if you become incapacitated or you cannot manage your own affairs, ability to pass assets to people and entities as you wish, avoid or minimize taxes, avoid misunderstandings so you don't have the family squabbling, limit administrative costs, and provide resources and care to those with special circumstances. First case study, Prince. He had a $156 million estate and he had no will. He died without a will or trust in 2016. The siblings and half siblings fought in court for years. And this shows how estate planning isn't about how much you have, it's about making your wishes known. It's a big, ugly, I think it went on for, I don't know, it's probably 14 years or something. Don't quote me on that, but it was a long time. And so all the attorneys were fighting, doing the best for the clients, but the legal fees significantly reduced the estate. Why have an estate plan? It's especially important if you own or control assets of any kind. It does not matter their significance or how much you have. If you want to have control over the assets and where they're directed upon your death, have someone responsible or trustworthy that you wish to manage your affairs, have someone um, to manage your affairs. You want to ensure that future of someone with special circumstances are taken care of. You want to minimize taxes while maximizing what remains to be passed on. What is included in your estate? Everything. Your residence, if you have other, vacation homes or commercial real estate, a family business, all your fun stuff, your vehicles and boats, all your accounts. There's a few exceptions, but and all your stuff that's not important and all your stuff that you feel that's very important. It might be important to your children or friends. So what are special circumstances? This doesn't necessarily mean that it's someone who's disabled or handicapped. Um, so it could be a mental or physical disability, but it's can be minors, persons that have addictions, people that are unable to manage their own affairs. There's things called spendthrift trusts because there's people, if they have money, they're going to go spend it and they might not have it, when they need it. People are in volatile relationships or marriages. If someone receives it, they might be on government benefits, and receiving too much income might hurt their situation there. Is there anyone that shouldn't have an estate plan? The answer is no. Everyone should have an estate plan regardless of their situation or net worth. Which estate plan do you have? Do you have a government plan or your own plan? In the government plan, that's called probate. So your assets are frozen. Your executor hires an attorney and the court is in charge. Heirs must go through a probate process. It can be expensive and stressful, and there's a long wait for distribution of assets, and it's public. Probate versus no probate. Intestate is basically you have no will, so heirs have to go through probate, and the courts pretty much decide where everything goes. Will, that's probate. Assets are distributed based on your wishes, but heirs must still go through probate. Revocable living trust. Assets are distributed based on your wishes and it avoids probate. Your plan, last will and testament. A will is the most important document to have in order to make sure your assets pass to your intended beneficiaries at death. It allows you to name a personal representative, someone you trust, who will carry out the wishes stated in your will. It lets you name a guardian for your children. You can also create a trust in your will to achieve particular planning. And every state has its own requirements for what makes a will valid. Many people with children think they don't need a will because everything, even if they're in name alone, they feel it will pass to their surviving spouse. But generally, that is not in the case. Like in Indiana here, um, if you don't have your wishes in writing, the court will default to 50% to the surviving spouse, 50% to the kids. Thus, your assets may not go where you want them to. Trusts are arrangements, that they're flexible and can specify how and when the assets pass to your beneficiaries. They can be established during your lifetime or at death by inclusion in your will. In certain circumstances, a trust is a helpful planning tool. It can help plan for incapacity and keep certain assets out of probate, which we'll discuss this a little bit later. They can be set up during your lifetime as separate standalone entities, or, like I just mentioned, they can be put in your will. Um, they can be, they help with the overall strategy to minimize taxes. If you have certain property managed by a professional, it can provide for minor children, elderly parents, other dependent beneficiaries. And then some trusts um, can protect your assets from future creditors. Revocable living trust, that's the most popular. Your trust assets are not frozen. Heirs can avoid probate. The trustee is in charge. They can choose how payments are distributed. Special needs can be covered in there, and there's a quicker distribution of assets, and it's private. It's not intended to be a tax saving strategy, but it does protect assets and does not protect assets from creditors. So revocable versus irrevocable. Revocable, it's designed to avoid probate. You're in control. Assets transfer from you to you as the trustee, and you can change your mind. It's irrevocable upon death. Irrevocable is designed to protect assets. You are legally removed from all rights of ownerships of the assets, and you can't, once you decide it and you put the property in it, you can't change it. So is the trust right for you? And advantages, beneficiaries can gain access to assets quicker than if it's transferred through a will. There's more control of how and when the distributions are made. There can be protection from creditors, divorces, spendthrifts. Um, and an inter vivos trust avoids probate. Disadvantages. Terminating or changing trustees can be difficult. Fees to set up a trust are typically greater than for a will. Ongoing trust administration costs fees and their expenses. If you don't retitle assets into the trust, the assets are going to go through probate. Assets with beneficiary designations. They both have, um, there can be drawbacks and there can be benefits. Being able to designate a beneficiary on your assets is almost the most efficient way to transfer them upon death. Um, However, sometimes, it makes equalizing your estate difficult. That's the main disadvantage. You kind of have to be proactive on the items that are either in your trust or going to be probatable. Um, the type of things that life insurance, IRAs, retirement plans, those are type of assets with beneficiary designations, annuities. So this is about passing on after your death and having control, um, of your assets after death. So a lifetime asset trust is important. The main point is, 50% of all marriages end in divorce. So, if you've worked your whole life, you pass away, let's say your daughter inherits $1 million, but they might have a rocky relationship. If they go into divorce and the assets are in her name, her spouse is entitled to half of them. The other thing is, let's say, you know, your your um, your daughter's marriage is perfect, and they're great, but if some accident hits, let's say, you know, you pass them $2 million, and they have a half a million life or half a million on their auto liability, and there's an accident that requires a lot of need for the injured person. If an attorney sees a couple $1 million, they're probably going after that money. If it's in a lifetime asset trust, that it's not owned by your daughter, therefore the attorney will probably just take the insurance settlement and move down the road. So it can be set up either, using a living trust or a will. And then what happens is upon death, it splits assets into the lifetime asset protection trust for each child's lifetime. And there's different names for this. This is an easier thing to think of because it's for the lifetime of your beneficiary. It can limit distributions made to current and future spouses. Assets transfer specifically to bloodline heirs and rightful grandchildren. It protects assets if there's divorce or bankruptcy or lawsuits and any other creditors. A Q-tip trust. This is basically, let's say you pass away and your husband remarries. Um, you, you might want your assets to, eventually go to your children and not to the, your widow's um, new spouse. So Q-tip trust can help prevent that. So the spouse is the first beneficiary. Your children would be the successor. If you die before your spouse, or surviving spouse would get distributions from the earnings off the trust, and then, or however you want to set it up. But then after you're gone, they can get income, and then once they pass, your children would get the asset. Michael Jackson is an example of this is a very important example because this happens. I've seen it happen a lot. The trust that didn't work, he had a trust, but he never funded it. And funding it means, if you want your house in your trust, that you have to change the title to where it's, Michael Jackson's Living Trust, for example. So what happened to him is his assets went through probate anyway. There were tons of delays, costs, and it totally defeated the purpose of setting up a trust. So they only work when they're properly funded and executed. Power of attorney, this is, very important. Um, Power of attorney is an alternative to having a court appoint a guardian. That can take a month or two. And this way, for your heirs, this helps make the decision for them. I know in my family, when it comes to medical, I'm pretty sure my mom wants, my sister to be in charge of, the medical decisions. Um, not saying I don't have compassion, but we all, I'm a typical man and she's a typical female, so she probably has a little more empathy than I would, and more patience. Glenn Campbell, he's an example of why it's important to have a power of attorney. He had Alzheimer's. The family fought over his care and money. There were disputes over guardianships and decision making, and his wishes were never clearly documented. So if you plan for incapacity, this avoids painful family conflicts. An advanced healthcare directive or power of attorney for management of healthcare. This basically, allows you to lay out. Some people call this a living will, durable power of attorney for healthcare. Some states it's a healthcare proxy, but basically this allows you to, appoint a healthcare agent that designates your medical care decisions when you can't yourself. And so for example, when you have end stage medical condition, you can decide, before it happens, hey, if I'm on a ventilator, um, you know, I'm willing to give myself a shot for 20 days or 30 days or 60 days, but I do not want, my estate or whoever's paying for the care, I do not want, to be on a ventilator for 3 years. And you can decide that beforehand. Estate administration. Upon your death, the assets of your estate will be gathered and managed by a personal representative. He or she is tasked with paying the estate's debts and distributing the remaining assets to the proper beneficiaries. They follow what you put in your will. Most wills have to be probated by the rules of the state. And probate starts when someone, that would be typically it's your representative or their attorney, they have to file a petition and the will to get the probate started. If you have a very small estate under $100,000 in Indiana, there's like it's kind of like the 1040 easy, but there's a one-page form, and that I think for most people, that allows for a much quicker probate process. Unpredictable expenses of probate, attorney's fees, probate fees, appraisals, estate taxes, income taxes, management fees, debts, lawsuits, end of life medical care bills, and different things. Which, most of these, there's an average, but you never know if you go through probate. Can probate be avoided? Yes. We've mentioned certain things. State plan can be designed to limit the assets that pass through probate, or you can avoid it altogether. Probate property, assets in your name alone, no beneficiary, assets passed per the terms of your will or the laws of the state if you do not have a will. Non-probate, certain jointly owned property, beneficiary designated property like life insurance, annuities, IRAs, and trust owned property. So if you have a living trust, a revocable trust, those do not go through probate. Why many people, like most people, why they do nothing? They don't get their estate plan done. It's probably in here somewhere, but procrastination. I tend to procrastinate, so I usually get stuff done because I know if I don't, I'll just drag it, be 4 months later and someone's still saying, "Hey, did you get this done?" So, but most people, they don't want to hire an attorney. It's can be intimidating, can be expensive. It's a time-consuming process. People are unsure of what to do. So they go to webinars like this. They want to avoid the conversation. They believe that trusts are only for rich people, and they do not have a full understanding of the burden on their loved ones when they die. Like they haven't been through it. So the important estate plan questions. I know I asked this at the beginning, but it's very important. Do you have a will, a trust, a power of attorney, a HIPAA waiver? If you answered yes to any of these, when was the last time you had it reviewed and updated? And where do you keep those documents? If you do not know what's in your estate planning documents or you don't have them, you're here at the seminar. Um, you know, I'll ask you to schedule a meeting, but you can put it on a piece of notepad and leave it on your chair. Hey, Mike, will you follow up with this? And it doesn't mean you have to work with me, but if you want us to drip you an email once a week or phone call, we'll do it for you. Long-term care and Indiana Medicaid. And we're going to go over this real quick. Again, we're not attorneys. Medicaid and Medicaid planning for long-term care, that's a very complex topic. The average monthly rate for a private room in Indiana nursing home is more than $9,000, with additional costs influenced by demand, staffing, on-site specialties. Personal experience, I went through this with my grandmother and my father. $9,000 isn't even, and this has been a few years. $9,000 isn't even close to covering it in a decent facility. For assets and trust transactions, and this is for people and for the right person, Medicaid planning, can be very important. But for assets and trusts, Medicaid looks back 5 years from the date of application to see whether any assets were transferred for less than fair market value. Assets in children's name. A lot of people think, hey, I'll just put it in my, my son's name. They have he's responsible, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's still a 5-year look back, unless he paid you for him, which didn't accomplish the goal. My question is, What happens if there's a divorce or there's a car wreck that exceeds, where an attorney sees those assets or feels there's assets and he wants to go after them, or even other, it could be bankruptcy or any other type of lawsuit. Um, and I have a divorce, and I was in my 20s, but we had friends. There was a divorce story. They put their assets in their sons' names, and I was friends with him. He was a bonehead. His wife was, very, very, even keel person, but they put $800,000 in their names, and then he did made a bad, well, quite a few bad decisions. And he was the one that filed for divorce. And that 800,000 turned into 400,000 real fast. And she didn't want to do it. I think she used it for leverage. She probably got the money out of his 401k, but she wasn't even being mean about it. So just beware. Um, and then the assets, nursing home spouses share will be spent down until it gets to $3,000. Then Medicaid will then assist in their care. The spouse at home gets one half of countable assets at the time of admission to the nursing home, and they get to keep 157,920, but they won't draw it down to less than 31,584. This was 2025, so it's probably a couple $100 more. Countable assets, cash, checking, savings, CDs, stocks, bonds, pretty much anything. They'll let you, if you're a spouse, they'll let you keep the home. Um, but then, and I'm not sure on a practical manner if they do this, but they have the right once the other spouse passes away, they have the right to sell that house to recoup their money. And here, revocable trust is included. So income in your name remains your own. Spouse at home may keep his or her personal income. If their income is less than 2644, then he can keep part of that income, and part of the income of the nursing home spouse's income to bring it up to 2644. Sorry, it's kind of confusing. If the spouse at home has living expenses that are high, they can appeal up to basically, $4,000 a month. This just breaks it down to a chart. What about your retirement plan? Does it fit into your estate plan? And if there is a retirement, can it if there is like a storm, a bear market, can your retirement survive that storm? Um, just some history, the good old days. And this is for most people. I've always owned my own business, so it didn't count for me. But back in the good old days, like pre 1978, there were pensions and security. For decades, employees spent their company working or spent their working years at the same company. And at retirement, they, got a gold watch and they got a reliable pension check to go along with their Social Security. They have consistent, predictable income from that pension, and they didn't have to take on big risks and worry about the stock market when they were retired. And then what happened was, we went to 401ks. If you're in public work, those are 403Bs or 457, same concept. Um, So now, there's 8.9 trillion in employer-sponsored defined contribution plans. 6.3 trillion is in 401ks. So there aren't very many pensions left. So you're left to do it alone. You're limited investment options, and you have very few safe options. Even bond funds, which I don't think I have a chart of this, but bond funds, which they're guaranteed, and if you hold on to a bond for its maturity, you're not going to lose money. But if you're having to take income or withdrawing on bond funds, we've had two or three periods in the last 5 years where, you know, the principal and bonds were negative if it were in mutual funds. Taxes and inflation and retirement. Inflation, we're all living longer. And, if anybody's seen the predictions on AI, I think we're all living to infinity because AI is going to figure out how to make us live to 140. Um, but basically, this chart is about, um, the amount of money we'll need and when it will double. So if we have, we had a high inflationary period, seems to be coming down, still kind of being a little difficult. But so if you need $50,000 a year to live on right now, um, and we have a 3% inflation rate, that amount will double in 24 years. So when you're 80, my math's wrong, 90, if you're 65, 24 years, by the time you're 90, and everybody thinks, oh, I won't live to 90. Well, I have at least two relatives who lived to 90. If it's a 4% inflation rate, which that's, in recent history, we're 4%'s been pretty normal. That'll double in 18 years. So you really have to uh, have this planned out for your retirement withdrawal strategies and taxes. Taxes and uncertainty. We've had rising interest rates and rising federal debt. So, you know, it's suggested that prepare for an uncertain tax policy. Everybody, I mean, even though tax rates just went down, um, a lot of people think they're gonna have to raise taxes um, to get everything back in line. Um, Diversifying your income and using tax advantage strategies can help safeguard your retirement against the shifting financial landscape. One big, beautiful bill act. It basically extends the income tax rates with inflation adjustments starting this year. The deductions, they made the deductions permanent, and then they're going to be adjusted for inflation. So in 2025 is 15,750 for individual, 31,500 for married filing joint. In addition, for seniors, if you're 65 and older, and this only lasts till 2028 unless they can make it permanent, you get a $6,000 deduction for each individual. So those phase. So if you're a married couple, that gives you 12,000 extra in deductions for your taxes. They phase out at 75,000 for singles, 150 for joint. The problems with retiring today, longevity risk. A 64, 5-year-old can expect to live another 19 to 21 years on average. A third of 65-year-olds currently will reach age 90. One in seven will live beyond the age of 95. So the average American lives in retirement for 18 years, but retirement could last 20 or 30 years or more. And 10 years ago, um, I wouldn't think it's possible, but with, the pharmaceuticals and I was joking about the AI, but it's true. Because they're going to help, make better drugs, help, people just live longer. But this increases the risk of running out of money. Sequential return risk. And this is very, very important because, well, I'll show you in the next slide, because, we have, I don't know if everybody knows what bear market is, but we've had like in the last 5 years, a few different times where the market has declined, stock market, 20%. It might have been like for a month or two or 5 months. So it hasn't really showed up in the stats to really scare people. But you need to be aware of this because if um, let's say you retire in January of 27, and then there's a bear market like March through, it doesn't matter, September. If it goes down 20% and you're taking withdrawals out, it tremendously changes the ability of your money um, to keep up with inflation and to last. So a five, so so most of us planners, we have Monte Carlo and all that stuff, but we'll show you like a hey, 5% average return over 20 years or 12%. Dave Ramsey likes to say we all get 12% a year, which isn't true. Um, that 5% average over 20 years sounds really good. But if you have a negative 20% return in year one, followed by a plus 30% in year two, that sounds like, hey, I made money. But when you're withdrawing, it creates a vastly different outcome than if you had a 30% increase your first year and a negative 20%, and especially when you're taking withdrawals. Here's, I think this is from Schwab. Um, And here's an example. It's, just look at the chart. If investor one has a 15% decline during the first 2 years of his retirement, they both have $1 million. So he's taking withdrawals. I don't remember the amount, but it's pretty normal, like 50,000 a year, I think. Because of the withdrawals and the decline, if you go out here 18 years in retirement, he's pretty much out of money. And then, oh, look, it's the female gets blessed here. But investor number two experiences a 15% decline during the 10th and 11th years, and she still has 400,000. So she's still set. But when advisors run like a 5% or an 8% number on average, it doesn't really, you know, cover what can happen. And when the average, like the average isn't really that important. So here's his history about bear market. So 23, 24, you had negative 20. 22, you had negative 25. And 20, so this is really, if you look at this, we didn't have a bear, because we had a terrible market in '08, well, '09, '08, and then had 10 good run till 2020. But there's big drawdowns like every 2 years because well, you had COVID, there's been shocks. So it's something to be aware of. And when you're sitting down with your planner, it's something that we like some fixed income investments or fixed products that minimizes the risk of those withdrawals. So, and of course, I started my new firm, so I'm highly suggesting you don't have to do this with me, even if you have a current advisor. If you've lost touch or you haven't had it updated for a while, get your retirement income plan reviewed. And definitely, especially if you're not working with us, um, definitely ask your advisor what happens if we have a bear market. Our mutual funds, or doesn't have to be mutual funds, but our investments, what happens if they decline 15% the first 2 years? And have them, and I'm telling you, like everybody has Monte Carlo, but I had one of the best scientists in the world. I'm not joking. He was a chemistry professor. And years ago, I said, hey, we have Monte Carlo when it first came out. And he laughed at me. He goes, yes, we have Monte Carlo too. Just run a lower number. But what I did with him, because he didn't seem to be satisfied until I showed him he eventually ran out of money, even though, yeah, I'm pretty sure, he was never going to run out of money. Um, so we ran a lower number, but also took out, hey, if we lose, I think it was a $2 million portfolio. If we lose $300,000, now, so I took out 15% and ran it that way at a lower number. And I think that one got him, by the time he was 98, he was out of money. So that made him happy. But it's again, it's just smart to do. And a lot of people can probably retire on less money than, what is the rule of thumb. But to me, it's very important that you look at that. And then, and a lot of people, They don't like the word annuity, that for some people, Social Security is an annuity. Sometimes, since most people don't have pensions, having like that another like small layer of annuities, so you have a guaranteed monthly income if the markets go down, where you don't have to withdraw as much. That can be a helpful thing. And it's not advice; it's just food for thought. So, what should you expect from your financial professional? That they understand your needs. They always put your best interests first. They give you client education, so they're not preaching to you, and they're not, they're educating you. So, you want your advisor to give you options, but you want to be educated. So, if you see two options or three options, you want to make sure you're comfortable telling them which option you feel is best for you. That you have a written retirement plan, your estate plan's up to date, you have communication and coordination with your other advisors, and you have periodic reviews. So the next steps, um, and again, no obligation, but you can schedule a complimentary review, um, get your estate plan in place, get a tax efficient plan, whether you're retired or not retired, because taxes can take, even if it's only 15%, that it's 15%. You're losing 15% a year. And get a comprehensive retirement income plan review. So you're making sure you're not running out of money. So thank you very much. Um, I'm Mike Wright with Foresight Wealth Advisory. We're going to open up for questions and answers right now. Um, and, it should take 10, 15 minutes. And thank you for coming.